experience across the lifespan, across one's life, that demands the surrender of something personally significant or personally familiar. The myth that so many individuals unfortunately believe in, or at least they by practice believe in, is that grief is caused by one thing and one thing only. And that, of course, is the death of someone important. And we would not in any way want to denigrate or de-emphasize that tremendous loss. But there are so many other kinds of losses that produce grief besides that of a death loss. And so for the next few moments, let's just brainstorm. What are some things that produce grief that are, as Dr. Peggy Writing says, significantly important, familiar, that one has to surrender? What are some things that produce grief just like that of a death situation, but it's something different? Go ahead, yes ma'am. Divorce. Anytime there's a divorce, there's a grief loss. Every situation that is imaginable and then some will be involved in regard to the loss of a divorce, breakup, marriage. Now, I think I know the answer to this question. True or false? When two people get divorced, they are the only two people affected by that loss.
False.
Exactly. Anybody and everybody involved in that relationship is going to be affected negatively by that relationship of a breakup of a marriage. That includes not only the parents, not only the siblings, not only children, not only grandparents, not only aunts and uncles and cousins. It's going to involve the church as well. It's going to involve the neighborhood. It's going to involve everybody at work. Because divorce situation, it's like throwing a little stone in a smooth pond. It's going to cause waves. And it's going to affect in so many different kinds of situations. A dear friend of mine who tragically had to go through a divorce situation in regard to a mate that did not fulfill their rights and their vows of faithfulness in that marriage relationship. And even after going to counseling, the individual, the guilty individual, said, "I'm tired of this. I'm sorry. Hey, I did this, but I'm ready to move on. Let's get a divorce and let's just go on." Anyway, the individual that was having to deal with this from a Christian perspective told me in all seriousness, "I would give anything to go and visit my ex's grave." They were not wishing to end their life. They just said that because, as they explained, everywhere I go in this community, I hear and I see them living their lives totally contrary to respect for God and love and just common decency, and said, "I would love to be able to go to my ex's grave so that I would have closure." You hear what they're saying? Years ago, I said it this way: divorce is like having a funeral with an open casket that never gets closed. Think about that word picture for just a moment. It's a serious thing, and it's a terrible thing. And regardless of what the circumstances are, It is a tremendous grief loss that will occur how long? As long as those two individuals and family members are involved in that relationship for years to come, particularly if there's children involved. So that's a great, terrible grief loss. I think I heard someone else say job. I live in Huntsville, Alabama. Unfortunately, large companies decide to downsize, and they will take an employee that has been a faithful member of that company for 30 plus years, and they will say something like this on a Monday morning. We are very grateful for your presence. We're grateful for your faithfulness. Thank you for your 30 years of service. We are downsizing. We no longer need your employment here. You have till 12 noon to get off the premises, and someone, a guard, will be escorting you as you leave. Here's your severance package. Now, I have an idea that happens in Gadsden, Alabama, just like it happens in Huntsville, Alabama, or anywhere else. Question: who's affected by that job loss? Everybody. Anybody and everybody that has any kind of connection to that person or to those persons. The maid, the children, the grandchildren, the creditors, the church. See the point? I mean, I've heard of congregations that have made public announcements. Please remember Mr. and Mrs. Blank, fill in the blank, because he just got told that his job is over after 30 years. Please keep them in your prayers right now. I think that's appropriate. I really do. Because those folks are grieving job loss. Other kind of losses. Financial, thank you. Which obviously would be another thing connected to a job loss. Finances. If you've got any money in retirement, I'm sure just like that Saturn V rocket in Huntsville, Alabama, just goes straight up all the time, right? No, you know that. It doesn't work that way, does it? Up and down, all around sometimes in regard to finances. And then debilitating things occur that also produce loss in regard to finances, and therefore the finances aren't what you need to be. Don't know whether you've been to the grocery store lately, but it's getting pretty serious in regard to the cost of certain things. And if you're on a fixed income particularly, that's a grief loss. So that's the point I want to make here. These are grief losses just like any other kind of grief loss that we deal with. And they need to be validated in that regard. Other kind of losses. Health. Thank you. Health. Everything is wonderful with our health until what? We no longer have it. And then you wonder, why am I so depressed? Why am I hurting? Why is it hard for me to get out of bed anymore? Why is it hard for me to get up and get going? When we start losing our health, it changes the way we have to look at things. It changes the way we deal with things. We become, instead of independent, we become dependent. And that changes the way we look at life and other such things. Other kind of losses. Anybody ever had a pet loss? Think about that. You're saying, but it's just a pet? What did that pet represent? Security, comfort, assurance, validation of your being important. Because an animal loves unconditionally. Maybe the significance of that loss when that pet dies or something happens to it because of who gave you that pet that no longer perhaps is there. We grew up with a dachshund dog named Heidi. Mom and Dad wished that Don and Cindy and I were as smart as that dog was, because she was very easily trained. She was very, very smart. She was just a pleasure to be around. It's already been said, we're preachers' kids. Our dog was a preacher's dog. She loved the Word of God. She chewed up 3 Bibles. She was concerned with evangelism. She ate 7 soles of shoes. And on one occasion, she was cleansed and sanctified. She ate a box of chocolate egg slices. And she lived to tell about it. Or she was alive the next morning. But when Heidi died years ago, when we were growing up as kids, we were all old enough that we had all, Don, Cindy, and I got married, and we got to have Heidi to go with us and stay with us at our house for a couple of times for the holidays. But when Mom and Dad called, and they told us that because of health issues that Dr. Jordan had to put Heidi down, there were 8 adults bawling their eyes out, because that dog had meant so much to us. And again, I'm not trying to underestimate or overestimate the influence of an animal, but believe me, that's a grief loss. That's really a grief loss. Other kind of grief losses. Yes, ma'am.
I've experienced this one personally, infertility.
Yes, ma'am. Yeah. Which is, again, a health issue, but yet it's a very specialized one. Yeah, the inability to have children, or perhaps the idea of dealing with miscarriage. My wife and I dealt with that when we were in Evergreen. Just the inability to be like other people and to be able to enjoy relationships in marriage and in family that you would like to have. And again, that's a terrible loss. It really is. Related to health loss or whatever, what about if you have to lose a part of a body, or a mastectomy, or some other kind of situation where part of your an appendage is having to taken out or taken off for various reasons. Those are grief losses. We had a friend of ours, I knew of someone over in the Birmingham area, a coal mining situation, due to an accident. He lost a leg. The man grieved for years because he no longer was able to do what he had wanted to do to take care of his family. That's a grief loss. Others. Ma'am? Other people. Thank you. Are we talking about friend relationships, those kind of things? Yes. Friends and relationships. Either, and it could be all kinds of ways. You could deal with someone having to move away. You could deal with someone that used to be there for you that no longer is there for you because of arguments or situations or misunderstandings, whatever. The dependent upon that person as being that person that was always your go-to person, always there to help you, no longer there. And it's a painful kind of loss. And it's one that you can't replace that. No one can replace another person when it comes to a relationship. You may find other individuals that are friends, but you're not going to find that person anymore. And so that's a terrible loss. What else? Yes, ma'am.
How about losing your house in a natural disaster?
Wow, thank you, ma'am. Natural disaster, tornadoes, hurricanes, fire, destruction, whatever the case may be. Back in 2011, we had, I'm not sure what it did here in this area, but Huntsville, which is Tornado Alley, had destruction, and a lot of people lost houses. And, and you hear them say when you're talking to them, they say, well, we know it's just a thing. We know it can be rebuilt. But it's what's inside that house that can never be replaced. It's what maybe you built that house with your own hands. You certainly paid for it with your own sweat and blood. And so therefore, natural things like that, we realize, the brain says, well, you can always rebuild. But the heart says, but it can never be made like it was before. See, that's the point we're talking about here. In any kind of grief loss, there's a constant battle between the head and the heart. And you gotta validate both of them in regard to the idea of what's dealing with loss. Other kinds of losses.
Christian falling away from Christ.
Thank you, ma'am. We call that apostasy. Someone that used to be faithful to the Lord, maybe to this congregation, to the church, to you, to your family, and no longer are they where they need to be. Who does that hurt? Everybody that knew them. Everybody that knew them. And there's that constant reminder, they're not where they should be. They're not where they used to be. They're not there what they were trained to be or what we tried imperfectly to be there for them. Terrible kind of loss. Disabled person. Retirement is a loss. Had a lady tell us, yeah, my husband after 30 years came home. Oh man, what a grief I'm experiencing now. And she was honest. She said, in fact, I'm going to go get a part-time job just so I can get away from him. Well, so some of you ladies are nodding your head. You know what I'm talking about. Retirement. Yeah. And there was a study done several years ago when we were in the military that those type A personalities, that if they retire and they go home and sit down, I think this was a major in the Army, if they go home and sit down, guess how many months that will be before they die? 18 months. They literally cannot handle sitting down and doing nothing. It will drive them crazy, if not worse, and certainly everybody else around them. But also, what if it was a forced retirement? See, now you got another situation. Now you got the idea of, okay, I've reached that age that no one wants to talk to me anymore. No one wants to have me anymore. What's my opportunity? What's my job possibilities of getting another job? They look at my resume, they look at my age and say, I don't think so. Retirement can be a terrible grief loss.
Loss of identity.
The loss of identity. In what regard?
I'm talking about, if the wife was known because of the work of the husband and then he passes away,
Yeah. And a lot of times in our jobs, men are much worse about it than women are, but in our jobs, we are what we do. And when we no longer do what we used to do, then what does that say about who we are? To the point? And so therefore there's that loss there that that comes about in regard to, well, you used to be this, but you're not that anymore. Other kind of losses. Moving. You ever had to move away from home, away from family, away from familiarity? And you're saying, why am I in a funk? Why can't I seem to get things going? Well, think about that. Think about the number of times as older adults or older individuals and families have to make a decision about mom and dad and their health issues and whatever, and we say, okay, y'all have got to move somewhere because we don't want you to be where you are by yourself. You need to, so where are you going to move? And whenever they move mom or dad away, or both of them away, particularly if there's a loss of one of them, then you got to decide, you know, let's just say, if her husband dies and you move your elderly mom away, what is she losing when she leaves the community where she's left, where she's been for 70 years? All of her friends, all of her family, her church family, her doctors, her dentists, the grocery store, the neighbors. I mean, the list just goes on and on and on.
The memories of the home and family that they built.
The memories of the home that they built together and what was done in that house and all that kind of stuff. And they come in, and I've had people come and said, Mom's not doing too well. I said, what do you mean? I think she's depressed. I said, what's she depressed about? Well, and then they described the situation to me, and I say, there's a reason why your mom's feeling the way she's feeling. Her whole life has been changed. And folks, the older we get, the more we do not like that word. Moving. The empty nest. That's a loss? Yeah. You know why it's a loss? Because we look at each other and we say, oh yeah, I remember you. We got married a long time ago. We've had kids together, and we've gone through all of those kids, and now they're all gone. Guess what, folks? They do. One lives, for us, one lives half a mile that way, and one lives half a mile that way. They got us closed in. We can't escape. We wouldn't change it for anything. Sexual abuse, Alzheimer's, birth defects, drugs, alcohol, theft. Anybody ever been broken into, robbed? That's a loss. It really is.
House burns down.
House burning down. Exactly.
You lose a lot of memories.
You lose a lot of memories. Estrangement, extended separation. Think about military folks. Think about all the losses that they have to deal with, and it happens every time they're deployed. Their entire family. I mean, anybody that's in the military, they have all my love, all my respect, all my appreciation, because they go through it over and over and over again. Losses. Mental health. Missing person. PTSD. Loss of confidence at church. Loss of an adopted child or a foster child. Someone said a few months ago, loss of control of my life during this pandemic. Wow. We could spend the rest of the day on that one, couldn't we? Here's my point. All of these produce grief just like the death of an individual. Yet we do not follow them. And so what we want to do, instead of thinking grief is caused by one thing and one thing only, and we know that's important, grief is caused by all these things that we talk about. And that's what we want us to remember. And that's why I want you to remember when you hear something happen to someone, think, oh wow, that's a grief loss. And then do something about it. Okay? The second thing, the handout you have in front of you, Acrostic of Grief. And Mr. Webster says it's an individual experience, generally a painful feeling of emotions or sadness that follows an actual loss or precedes an anticipatory loss. Mr. Webster, that's a great definition. But let's talk about what grief really is. So here's what we want to do. Taking antonyms, synonyms, we want to come up with words that remind us of what grief is using the different letters for the words. For example, think of a word related to grief in one way or the other that starts with the letter G.
Good grief.
Good grief. That's a phrase. Good grief. Yeah. You said, or someone else said, gloom. Gloom. Yeah. Gloom. Sadness.
Guilt.
Remorse. That's what gloom is like. Yes, ma'am.
Guilt.
Guilt. Thank you, ma'am. We feel guilty a lot of times even when we have no reason to feel guilt. A lot of times people will say, I feel so guilty. We had a lady tell us one time, she said, I'm dealing with guilt because of the loss of my father. And I said, okay, would you want to tell me any more? Well, we were all taking turns, and I live about 100 miles away from where he lived, and said it was my turn to come and spend the week with mom and dad, taking care of dad, and said I was there last week, and then it was time for another sibling to come in, and said I left and went to my house to take care of my family, and during that time my dad died. And I said, yes ma'am, I'm very sorry. And she said, I feel so guilty for that. I said, ma'am, you know what you just told me? She said, what? I said, you just told me how much you loved your dad. That's what that was. I said, you don't have guilt. I said, did your dad know where you were? Well, sure he did. I said, and he would have wanted you to be exactly there for your family, just like you had been the week before with him. I said, you're not dealing with guilt, you're just dealing with love. She said, I feel so much better. I said, well, you should. Because a lot of times when we say we're guilty or we feel guilt, it's because it's one of those would have, could have, should haves. And if we had known ahead of time, or if we could have anticipated it, we would have been and done the things that we were supposed to do. Folks, we're only human. So a lot of times, now I'm not saying that there is a valid point for certain kinds of guilt, but most of the time when we're thinking about guilt, we're talking about other things besides guilt. But that's a good word. What else? Letter G. What about God? Does God play a part in our grief? Sure He does. Paul says in 2 Corinthians 1, 3, and 4, He's the God of all comfort, who comforts us in our tribulation so that we can turn around and comfort others with the blessings that He's given us. So God's certainly involved in dealing with the idea of grief. What else? What about goofy? Does grief make you feel goofy? I know Katrina's here. I won't mention names. We had a lady. I started my grief support classes in Evergreen, Alabama, 1992, and this was probably the second or third session that we had after having done one or two groups. And this lady had called from the community. She said, I want to come to your grief support class. And I said, ma'am, you're welcome to come. So she came, but she came in late. So she sat sort of outside the circle and just listened to everyone as we discussed different things. Well, after the class was over and we were all getting ready to leave, I went up and met her and thanked her for coming. And I said, I hope you benefited by at least being here today. She said, yes, I realize that I'm not the only crazy person in Evergreen, Alabama. And I said, what? She said, I literally thought I was losing my mind. But said tonight, being in class, I realized I'm just dealing with grief. Well, see, grief does make us feel goofy. Sometimes in the middle of it, we do crazy things. As Don mentioned this morning, we put bacon to bed, or we put our keys that are supposed to be underneath the pillow in the freezer, and something that's supposed to be in the freezer ends up underneath our bed, our pillow. So it makes us do crazy things. Other words for the letter G. What about grave? It's got a double meaning, doesn't it? Ghastly, groping, give up, guaranteed. Grief is guaranteed. Gigantic. Someone told me one time, grief is gut-wrenching. Now the letter R. Think of words that remind you of what grief is using beginning with the letter R. Real. Thank you, ma'am, for saying that. Real. Grief is not something easy to deal with. It's real. And connected to that, it's raw. It's out there. This is tough stuff. This is not grief 101. This is grief 601. We're dealing with serious things here. This is real. This is raw. What else? Letter R. Yes, ma'am.
What about regret?
Regret. Go back to that shoulda, coulda, woulda. Regret. Remembering or remembrance. Because that's why there's pain and grief, because we remember the way things used to be, or the way the relationship was, or the way the house was before it was destroyed, or the way this relationship, this job that I had that I got knocked out of recently, or wherever the case may be. Letter R. Think of some words. Reality. Thank you, sir. Exactly. Reality. What else?
Remorse.
Remorse. Yeah. Sorry for what happened, or sorry for what didn't happen, or sorry that you didn't see something that you should have seen was happening. What else?
Resentment.
Resentment. It's an excellent word. Resentment. Resentment of what?
Maybe people that maybe in the bubble of your life that you feel like there's been more involved, either care or some reason, and you resent those people in the spirit of grief, spirit that you resent them not meeting your expectations.
Okay. All right.
But to resent God.
You can resent God. Exactly. Because particularly if we have this, we talked about this in our very excellent parents and children's class this morning. If we make the mistake of saying things and letting people know that God needed someone or God wanted someone, we have planted an idea in a child's mind that God's out there just grabbing and choosing and snatching, and we will begin to resent that situation. Now, obviously, that's wrong, but the point of the matter is that a lot of times we start out that way. We start out wrong, we end up wrong, in that regard, because of the lack of education and the lack of carefulness in regard to what we're saying. But resentment, and I think it's 1 Samuel chapter 1, Hannah resented not being able to have children. And because her husband was married to another person, which is never a good idea as well, and she had children, she was rubbing it in her face. I've got all these children. I am loved by my husband. He must not love you because you can't have children. And that's when she asked for the boy Samuel. Resentment. I know of a situation where a mother died, and after going through some grief situations, this individual said, it really bothers me when I see other young ladies my age mistreat and disrespect their moms because I no longer have a mom. And said, I just want to shake him. I just want to sort of slap him around and say, wake up. Your mom and your dad's not gonna always be here. Treat them with respect. Love them. Take care of them. Go do the extra things with them. So the word resentment can have a lot of connotations in that regard.
If you see somebody that has done that, and then you resent them for treating them that way.
Exactly.
And a lot of times it can be the same thing with your husband, with your lost husband.
Right.
I mean, you see somebody that's got their husband and that, you know.
Exactly.
thinks you should be
There's
over.
another example of that. Exactly. You know, if you knew what I knew in regard to what it means to have a loss of a situation, you wouldn't be making these decisions. You wouldn't be saying these things. You wouldn't be acting this way. You wouldn't be so nonchalant about this relationship. Yes, sir.
If a person goes down that road of resentment, of blaming God or someone else, I think it's better a lot of times to just go ahead and deal with that, talk to God, don't involve others, but work it out. Talk to God about it. Express your anger or whatever it is and get it out of your system. Try to
Good
deal
point.
with it.
You know, Job, as much as we think we love the book, there are some really rough things in the book of Job. Because Job gets to the point of finally, after having his three friends do all the things that they've done, and I won't say any more because Don will have that to say at the 5 o'clock service, but you know, he gets to the point of saying, hey God, why am I having all of these problems? And what's interesting is God let him vent. God let him say what he wanted to say. And then God finally said, chapter 38, okay, Job, you've talked enough, let me talk now. But yeah, when we deal with resentment, we just need to get it out there. Reflection, responsibility, redirection, repercussions, reminiscing, resurrection, ripped, rambling, routine, or the lack thereof. Think about it. I already mentioned the word change. We don't like change. We love routine. What happens when grief happens? Sometimes changes. G-R-I.
You left out the most important.
Which one was that, sir?
Reoccurring.
Reoccurring. Wow. I may have to add that one to my list. I don't think that's on there. Reoccurring. Yes, it will happen again. Maybe a different kind of loss, but it will happen again. Man that is born of woman is a few days and full of trouble. Job 14:1. The letter I. Inability. Not being able to do what you used to be able to do. What else? Insecure. That's a great one. And a lot of times in grief loss, we begin to feel insecure. We get reminded that we're insecure because you can't handle this anymore. I can mention situations that I have known in churches, and people, you know, they set up the people that are dealing with grief already because they're wanting them to say, now you need to listen to me. You need to do exactly as I tell you to do. Well, sometimes that's a good idea, and sometimes it's not a good idea. But yes, it's very easy to feel insecure. What else? Individual. Grief is always an individual experience. Always. And then you got to deal with individuals around you. What else? Immediate. Had someone tell me that they felt insane. They said, I literally thought I was losing my mind because of my grief issues. Inadequate, inept, introverted, inward, irritable, inferior. You ever met anybody that made you feel like that you're not doing too well with your grief? That you're going to fail grief 101 because you're inferior? You know, they're comparing what they're doing to what you're doing, and they're saying you're not doing it my way, so therefore, what? You must be doing it wrong. I'm sorry, what?
Ill. I know that.
Ill. Yes.
You can have ill feelings, but other people become ill.
Exactly. Studies suggest that when a husband of some years loses his mate, that usually the next 12 to 15 months, he will be more susceptible to having health issues than he would have before. For women, if they lose their mate after a number of years, they will tend to have more health issues between, I think 18 to 24 months. Now, I don't know what the difference is. It probably deals with the idea of women being so much more superior than men and handling things. Seriously, I mean, I really do.
Women are more hard-hearted.
I'm sorry, what?
Women are more hard-hearted.
Did you say that? Oh,
My mother was a woman.
That's Barney Vineyard, at barneyvineyard.com.
You remember people used to pay Dear Abby a bunch to publish stuff like that.
But anyway, ladies, keep that in mind. There is a greater susceptibility of dealing with health issues after the loss of an individual, dealing with illness. Exactly. So that affects us definitely in that regard. Insidious, impossible, internal, incomplete, immature. Some lady said, someone told me the other day that what I was doing with my grief was idiotic. Well, that just makes you feel good, doesn't it? G-R-I-E, letter E.
Enormous.
Enormous, thank you, excellent. It's like there's an elephant in the room somewhere and no one wants to talk about it. It's enormous. What else? Emotional, which is why grief is so debilitating, because we are dealing with all kinds of emotions. All kinds of emotions. What else?
Exhausting.
What?
Exhausting.
Exhausting, exactly. Dealing with all the things that we have to deal with. It's exhausting. Empty. Thank you. Empty. Where do I go for a hug? Who can I talk to that I can trust? I go back to my house and it's quiet and it's empty and there's, empty. Eerie, enduring, escape, exposed, envy, somewhat connected to resentment, excessive, enough. Then the letter F. Yes, ma'am.
Actually, E, I was thinking everyone, because we're all affected.
Wow. Excellent. Everyone. Now, a single one of us, the point of the matter is, grief is a universal emotion that will affect everyone universally. Either you will grieve over something or someone significant to you, or they will grieve over your loss. Nobody's going to escape dealing with grief. So it is for everyone. You're exactly right. The letter F. Fear. Faulty. Final. What else?
Forlorn.
Forlorn. Forlorn.
Frustrated.
Frustrated. Forever. Future. Forgiveness. Finances. Fatigue. Failure. Ask how many people that are dealing with grief if they feel like that they are failing. And you'd be surprised by their answer. Forbidding. Faith. Frightened. Family. Had a lady tell me, I feel like a failure. They ask me, how are you doing? And I say, I'm fine. If I'm living you. Here's what we've done. we have defined grief with what you have on your handout. If you just pick one from each one of those letters, G-R-I-E-F, would that not be enough to have to deal with? But it's everything. You know, if I had a whiteboard, it's the whole thing dealing with grief. That's why it's so debilitating. That's why it's so exhausting. That's why we need help. So what we want to do for this 2 o'clock session was to say, okay, grief is caused by more than one thing and one thing only. It's every kind of grief loss. And secondly, here are the words, here are the descriptions of what grief really looks like. Well, we're going to take a quick break for a few minutes, and we're going to come back, and I think your outline says, yes, what everybody needs to know about grief. Thank you so much for coming, and thank you for being here for this 2 o'clock session. We'll take about a 10-minute break.